Hey everyone, this is Chris Crazy House, and there's a story that I saw posted on, I believe it's called, was it Afrofuturism Central? And it's just a collection of creators and people who would just enjoy black creative content, who like to post stuff up. But they're posting this, I think it was on Twitter or on Amazon, I can't see which, but it's about the comic strip Curtis. So I don't know if any of you guys know about the comic strip Curtis. You might not know about it unless you're like my age, in your 40s or late 30s, and you actually read comic strips in the newspaper. But there's a great comic strip named Curtis, one of the first and only comic strips that had a black character as the main character. It had a little boy named Curtis. He had his little hat turned backwards, and he grew up in a neighborhood with his mom, his dad, and his little brother, and just like his little adventures and experiences growing up in this neighborhood. He even had like a little one of his friends was like this little white kid from uh, immigrant from this weird little island or something like that. Just an interesting slice of life comic strip that came out back in the day, and I was always very much into reading the comics in newspapers. That's actually how I learned how to read. I learned how to read at a very young age, sitting with my grandfather, who was an avid reader of the newspaper, and he would always let me have the funny papers, as we called them back then, and we would sit and read them together. And Curtis was one of my favorites, just because I remember when it actually started and it got syndicated in the newspapers. I was very happy to see a little black kid in the comic strips. So this comic came before the Boondocks. That was pretty much the only black character in comics for the longest time, and it was created by a brother named Ray Billingsley. And you know, he brought up something very interesting. This was where the post came from, in that he saw one of the when they make these comics, sometimes the publishers will take the comics and put them into like a collection that people can buy and have like a collective version of the comic strip, almost like a graphic novel, but just has a whole bunch of the comic strips collected in one. So the creator, Ray Billingsley, he saw that one of the Curtis collections, an old one from 1993, was being sold on Amazon for $864.56. You heard that right, folks. The comic collection is being sold for $800.64, or $864.56. Sorry. So Ray brought this up, and he created a interesting discussion on this message board, where he said that he's always tried to bring it to people's attention how these major publishing companies, how they treat black creators who create black content. What they'll do is they'll rarely ever make collected versions of these comic strips. So it's almost like people will either forget about these characters or just not even know they exist, because there's never any collected versions or published versions of these characters in print. Now, of course, with the mainstream ones like Calvin and Hobbes and Garfield and other characters, they publish that all the time. You can find a new collected version of these books all the time. I just saw Calvin and Hobbes had another collection put out there for Halloween, right? But with a lot of these black creations and black creators, they don't publish these things, or they don't put them out there, and it's almost like they disappear, or they just become you forget about them completely, like they never existed. And Ray Billingsley was saying that they do this a lot to black creators, and the issue is now you have people trying to double back, and now if they do find a collective version, they find an old one, and then they oversell it. They sell it for a whole bunch of money. So there's other people profiting off of the lack of that black content. And he said he made a joke at the end of his post saying, it's funny because I don't, usually the art doesn't sell this well until the artist is already dead. He said, I need to go check the obituary to make sure my name isn't in there. But he's right. They did make some collective versions of Curtis, but they're old from the 90s. And since then, there hasn't been any because these publishers don't think that Curtis is a viable commodity that they should be printing at all. So it's almost like it's almost like a comic strip that's been forgotten by a lot of people. Unless, like I said, unless you're like me, who was a big fan of it back in the day. So these companies, they don't publish it and they make these artists and these creations disappear. But then you'll have these sellers online selling it and making bank by selling it because it's rare and you can't find it anywhere else. It becomes so rare. And that happens to a lot of black creations out there, not just with comic strips, but it happens with books that black people publish. It happens with movies that black people have made. I remember I had a hard time finding a lot of black movies that I used to love, even from like the late 80s, early 90s. And unless the creator themselves works on putting the film on like Blu-ray or something like that, it just disappears into the ether and it's just out there. Or sometimes they might not have control over it. Like sometimes this happens with music where the creator doesn't have control of it anymore. The publishing company does, and they just sit on it and won't put it out there. Or if they do put it out there, it's not given a high quality transfer. So it's not in the highest sound quality or the highest video quality or the highest page and image quality that it could be, right? So this is why it's very important that if you're a creator, to realize the worth of what you're creating, even if it's not popular at the time. This is something that could be popular later. So you should always control it, own it, and make sure that you can do something with it later. Now there's, back then Ray Billingsley didn't have the outlets that he has now. Like now, if he still had all that material, he could just put it out himself on Amazon and make bank. I don't know if he still controls Curtis or what, or if like these newspaper syndicates still hold on to it. But now he could do it himself and self-publish and do well. So we have to be smarter that we don't fall into the same pitfalls as independent artists now. There's so many venues out there in publishing, self-publishing for writing, for music, for film. We don't have to go through these big companies anymore. And even if we make a small profit, that's still probably better than what we would make if we went through these mainstream companies. Because the mainstream companies, they take the lion's share of a lot of the money. This is why I self-publish my coloring books, because I'm the one that makes most of the money from it. So, I mean, you guys let me know how you feel about it in the comment section, and let me know if you remember Curtis from the comic strips back in the day. Anyway, this is Chris Crazy House signing out. Peace.